Hello everyone. Till now we have discussed about make an input or buy an input using the market and the vertical integration versus market, where the buyers has arm's length relationship with the suppliers. Now we will discuss about two more important alternatives under make versus buy continuum. Uh, there are several alternatives ways in which the exchange can be organized. In this section we discuss two important alternatives, that is a tapered integration where a firm both makes and buys a given input, and a collaborative relationship, which could be a formal contractual relation or a long-term informal relationship based on trust. In some cases, it can lead to alliances or joint ventures. So, what is this tapered integration? Tapered integration represents a mixture of market and vertical integration. A firm makes part of requirement in-house and procures the rest from the market. Firms like Pizza Corner and Madura Garments fall in this category, where they own small retail outlets and depend on franchisee or other models for the rest of their sales. Keeping part of the manufacturing in-house allows firms to have a better understanding of industry cost structure, and this also helps them in negotiating better deals with suppliers. Firms are able to the keep up the pressure on their internal supply group to innovate and work on cost reduction by showing them benchmark numbers from markets. Firm can also keep the pressure on the suppliers by saying that if they do not improve, the complete manufacturing will be shifted in house as they have the capability for it, as this helps avoid a potential hold up situation. The firm is less vulnerable on this front, though at first glance it looks like as if tapered integration allows a firms to be the best of both worlds. If not managed properly, the firm might end up getting the worst of both the worlds. By distributing production between internal and external supply groups, a company or a firm may not have economies of scale at both places, and the coordination in monitoring activities might increase cost significantly. Collaborative relationship. In a collaborative relationship, the supplier is an extension of the firm. The firm treats its suppliers as strategic partners, and usually a supplier is assured of business for a reasonably long period of time. The firm does not indulge in competitive bidding every year and does not change its supplier to get the small piece of reduction offered by the competing supplier. Information is shared freely across firms, and the supplier is willing to invest in relationship specific assets. Usually, the supplier gets involved early at the product design stage, and price paid to the supplier is based on the actual costs incurred. One major concern in all collaborative relationships is ensuring that the supplier keeps working on innovations. Just like the internal suppliers, the partner in a collaborative relationship is assured of business, and this may result in uh, complacency on the part of the supplier. Firms should periodically benchmark the partner's cost with the market so as to ensure that the supplier remain competitive. For example, benchmarks all its partners on cost and technology leadership. Only if the supplier maintains leadership on both of these fronts, uh, Dell continue with the same, continue with the same partner. Even firms like Toyota buy 80% of the required components from the market, but Toyota and Japanese and other Japanese, firms do not keep their suppliers at an arm's length and do not work with contractual relationship. Japanese manufacturers work with a network of suppliers with whom they maintain close long-term relationships. Japanese companies have subcontractor networks called Keiretsu. This network involves vendors, bankers, and distributors. Firms within a Keiretsu are linked by informal personal relationships. As they share long-term relationships, they avoid most of the problems associated with the market exchange relationships and are willing to invest in higher relationship specific assets and do not worry about information asymmetry and hold up problems. This allows each firm within the Kairos to focus on its core competence and all get the necessary economies of scale. However, they are assured of market. Uh, they may also suffer from agency problem discussed in vertical integration. American and European automakers have realized the importance of collaborative relationship and have been progressing in that direction over the past 2 decades without creating KRS2-like structure. To get similar benefits out of collaborative partnerships, Western companies have explored strategic alliances and joint ventures. Sourcing strategy may be, approach. Portfolio approach uh, is one of the very known approaches when it comes to sourcing strategy. So this portfolio approach, using this uh, approach, firms buy a large number of components and services, and of course, not all of them should be handled in the same way. The popular portfolio approach developed by Kraljic classifies items based on the importance of the item in terms of value of purchase, that is high versus low, and associated supply risk in the supply market. Supply risk captures two dimensions: number of suppliers in the market and the demand supply gap in the supply market. If an item has very few suppliers who have a monopoly in the market and the supply is less than the demand, the buyer faces a significant supply risk. In supply markets where there are large number of players and there is a surplus capacity in the market, the item bought will be classified as low supply risk category items. Packaging materials and transport services market come in this category and represent low risk items. Diesel engine, diesel fuel system, and proprietary technology items have a few suppliers, so they represent a high risk supply category. For example, Bosch has a market share of 81% in the fuel injection equipment market. So obviously it comes under high risk category. Similarly, oil and steel in early parts of 21st century represented the high risk category because demand outstripped supply. There was a strong demand for steel and fuel in India and China, and as a result, demand outstripped the supply. Because of this supply uncertainty created by disturbance in Iraq, the supply risk for oil increased significantly after the intervention by the United States of America in Iraq. Classifying item on their purchasing value is a straightforward issue because it just needs internal data and growth projections at the company level. Supply risk, on the other hand, represents more sophisticated analysis because the focus is on the supply markets, and in case of many commodities, the supply markets are global in nature. So firms should either develop adequate capabilities in this area or should take help from experts for carrying out these exercises. Firms buy a large number of components and services, and of course, not all of them should be handled in the same way. The popular that portfolio approach developed by Cradley classifies the item based on importance of item in terms of value and associated supply risk in supply market. Like everything else, purchasing expenditure per item also follow 80 to 20 rule. That is 20% of the items represents. So here 80% of the value of the purchase. Similarly, the bargaining power of the buyers and suppliers depends on the demand supply conditions in the supply market, and hence are the different they're all different for different items. Typically, managers end up spending equal amount of time and effort on all items and all suppliers, because of each supplier has to go through supplier certification. If there are large number of items and distinct components, and the purchasing manager may not be focusing on items where opportunity may be high or supply risk is very significant. To understand this issue better, we can use this. We can see a figure which has aggregated data from the portfolio analysis carried out by a couple of Indian firms. Uh, as seen in the figure, 4 to 10% of the parts accounted for about 70 to 80% of the purchase value. On supply risk dimensions, 80 to 90% of the items represents the low supply risk situations. What is most striking is the low value, low risk quadrant. Item in the quadrant account for 80 to 85% of the items and 50 to 25% of the purchase value. The explicit data on purchase orders are not presented in this particular study, but it is very likely that low value, low risk quadrant will account for large number of purchase orders, and therefore will take up the bulk of purchasing managers time. We obviously need a different sourcing strategy for each of these quadrant. So according to this portfolio approach, we have four different product quadrants, namely routine products, leverage products, strategic products, and bottleneck products. We take each category and discuss the sourcing strategy. So, in case of routine products, actually this quadrants represents significant opportunity. The focus is on reducing the number of parts and the number of suppliers. The aim is to reduce administrative and logistics complexity. The time saved here is used to focus on strategic suppliers and bottleneck suppliers. The focus is on moving to system buying rather than component buying. A large number of items and suppliers come in this quarter, which represents a non-critical, low-valued supply. Unfortunately, managers end up spending much energy in this quarter. Ideally, the purchasing department should not waste of its energy on small items. Rather, it should aggregate components into system and start sourcing the system. The issue is this issue is discussed in can be discussed in detail uh, if time permits. Then leverage products. This quadrant consists of high value standard products. The items provided, these items provide an opportunity for leveraging buying power in low risk low supply risk situations. In these supply markets, there are large number of suppliers and switching costs are very low. So firms should be aggressive in their attempts to encourage competitive bidding in order to leverage their position. Most of the benefits obtained by firms in reverse auctions have been taken in this category. In case of strategic products, actually this is a quadrant which represents high value products with high supply risks. As shown in this figure, this quadrant usually accounts for less than 5% of the item and for almost 40% of the purchase value. Item in this quadrant are treated as strategic items, and a firm must work towards establishing collaborative long-term relationship with suppliers in this quadrant. And firms must create opportunities for mutual cost reduction by working together on all aspects, including product design, etc. Because fewer parts, because of this fewer parts and suppliers are involved, uh, the firms can invest in building collaborative relationships. The top management of the company should get actively involved in devising a strategy for this category of products. The last one is bottleneck products. These items represents relatively low value but firm vulnerable on these front because of supply risk inherent in this market. Since a firm likely to be buying relatively smaller value, it's also unlikely to have much clout with suppliers. Here the focus is on securing supply, and firms should actively keep looking at alternative sources of supply. If possible, the firm should also look at substitutes that are from low risk supply markets. For example, in the diesel fuel system, there may not be too many suppliers of the required capability and competence. A firm might try and develop a better understanding of suppliers' priorities and their planning system so that it can align its buying plan with the suppliers' operating plans. For example, some steel producers produce certain grades of steel only once in a year. If an interested firm knew of their internal process, it might be in a better position to obtain a reliable supply. If required, the firm should also be willing to pay a premium for a reliable source of supply. Uh, Reconfiguration of the supply base. Most Indian companies work with a large number of vendors. In the past, a number of items were reserved for small scale sector, and this forced Indian corporations to source material from many small players. Most of the small firms had very little motivation to innovate. Purchasing managers prefer to work with large number of suppliers so that as a buyer, the firm could play one supplier against another at the bidding stage. If we take the example of freight, typical Indian firm work with large number of transporters. Toyota Kirloskar has just one strategic supplier of logistics service with whom it has a collaborative relationship. Other firms may not want to go all the way to single sourcing, but they have to work on configuring their supply base so as to reduce the number of suppliers. This reconfiguration uh, involves two different ideas. Number one, it is move to system buying, and second one is reduce the number of suppliers per item or system. uh, as discussed earlier, purchase portfolio analysis.
actually reveals that 80% of the items constitute 20% of the value. Rather than buying individual components, firms should buy system and modules. uh, this is illustrated with example from automobile industry. So in the figure you can see a firm like General Motor used to buy a seat parts from 25 odd suppliers, while a Japanese firm like Nissan buy the complete seat from a supplier. This does not mean that supplier manufactured all the 25 components of the seat. It just means that supplier is first tire supplier, who is in turn buys subsystem from the second tier companies, who in turn depends on the third tier companies. The difference between General Motors and Nissan's approach is can be seen through this chart. uh, it is not difficult to appreciate the difference between the coordination costs involved in procuring car seats at General Motor and Nissan. Uh, Auto assemblers globally have minimized their coordination cost by moving to system of buying, which requires a pyramid-shaped supply structure. Auto assemblers work closely with the tier 1 suppliers, who are responsible for the design and delivery of complete modules like seats, doors, and dashboards. These system suppliers buy their own subsystem from tier 2 suppliers, who in turn buy individual items from tier 3 suppliers. By working only with tier 1 suppliers, a firm cannot only reduce the coordination cost but also work on various initiatives to improve material and information flow across the chain. Supplier selection and auction. Supplier selection based on auctions and negotiations sometimes become crucial. Before selecting suppliers, a firm must decide whether to use single sourcing or multiple suppliers. A single sourcing guarantees the supplier sufficient business when the supplier must make a significant buyer specific investment, while having multiple source ensures a degree of competition and also lower risk by providing a backup should a source fail to deliver. The selection of supplier is done using a variety of mechanisms, including offline, competitive bids, reverse auctions, or direct negotiations. No matter what mechanism is used, supplier selection should be based on the total cost of using supplier and not just the purchase price. In general, auctions are the best used when quantifiable acquisition cost is the primary component of total cost. If ownership or post-ownership costs are significant, direct negotiations often lead to the best outcome. In many supply chain settings, a buyer looks to outsource a supply chain function such as production or transportation. Potential suppliers are first qualified and then allowed to bid on how much they would charge to perform the function. When conducting an auction based primarily on unit price, it is thus important for the buyers to specify performance expectation along all dimensions other than price. From the buyer's perspective, the purpose of an auction is to get bidders to reveal their underlying cost structure so the buyers can select the supplier with the lowest costs. A significant factor that must be accounted for when designing an auction is the possibility of collusion among bidders sometimes. Second, price auctions are particularly vulnerable to collusion. Contract is assigned to the lowest bidder, but at the price quoted by the second lowest bidder. Uh, So there are basic principles of negotiation. So firms enter into negotiation both for supplier selection and to set the terms of contract with an existing supplier. Negotiation is likely to result in a positive outcome only if the value the buyer places on the outsourcing the supply chain functions to supplier is at least as large as the value of supplier places on performing the function for buyers. The difference between a value of the buyer and seller is referred to as bargaining surplus. A good estimate of bargaining surplus improves the chance of successful outcome. Suppliers of Toyota have often mentioned that Toyota know our costs better than we do. Toyota knows our costs better than we do, which leads to better negotiations. The key to successful negotiation is to make it a win-win outcome that grows the surplus. It is impossible to obtain a win-win outcome if the two parties are negotiating on a single dimension such as price. To create a win-win negotiation, the two parties must identify more than one issue to negotiate. Identifying multiple issues allows the opportunity to expand the, if the two parties have different preferences. This is often easier than it seems in a supply chain setting, especially if both parties focus on the total cost of ownership. So how can we create a world-class supply base? Uh, so competitive edge is something all companies strive for as a part of building their so-called world-class supply chain. From a high-level definition, this means having effective interdependent relationships between people, process, and technology, and from our suppliers to our customers, such that we are enabled to increase market value and drive down end-to-end supply chain costs. So cost elements of efforts in getting to that end state includes collaborative long-term relationship built on respect and trust, effective demand signals that drives sourcing and manufacturing and enable volume adjustments as needed, operations and logistics significant alignment with the capacity managed and leveled productions schedules, ability to manage mixed loads with on time or in full delivery coming into or going out of the organization, ongoing collaborative operations and product delivery improvement with cost reduction across the end-to-end chain. So to becoming a world class requires let us focus on operational excellence and use all means at our disposal to ensure increased visibility across supply chain, improved control and decision making, improved product availability, improved alignment between organization and targets, increased data accuracy and user confidence, increased system performance, standardizing and harmonizing people, process and technology. Put all this together and the value opportunities to business become real. So we can reduce the inventory between 15 to 30%, 15% to and 30%, increase inventory turns by as much as less than 17.5%, uh, as much as more than 17.5%, and improved supply chain service levels by more than 20%, increased process efficiency by more than 20%. So this is one of the case study being done by HCL Exxon, who has helped an overgrowing list of clients transform their supply chain, and these are the outcome of this particular, uh, company, HCL Exxon. For a global storage networking manufacturer, we achieved an 85% improvement in operating cycle time by increasing supply chain efficiency. This is what the achievements done by HCL Exxon company after having uh, effective supply chain in place. For a leading biotechnology company, we cut the time required for demand forecasting by 50%. For a global life science company, we delivered an organization-wide 360-degree view of the customer to support its 1,200 member sales force. For a leading US retailers, we enabled a 78% increase in revenue, which they achieved within 4 months of its Oracle implementation. For one of the European largest soft drink companies, we delivered 49 million US dollars in cashable benefits by transforming its supply chain. For the world leader in information storage system, we reduced order to schedule cycle times from days to minutes by improving information exchange between warehouse and the plant. For the largest local authority in European public sector, we created more than 400 million pounds in savings over 3 years with up to 541 million uh, pounds project by overhauling the agency's operation. So these are the achievements by HCL Exxon company. Supplier development. Supplier development describes a structured program to improve the capabilities of the supplier. Buyers may seek to improve capability by sharing ideas with their suppliers, by seconding staff, by advertising funds for investment, or by working collaboratively to join or jointly develop new processes. Supplier development is resource intensive and usually focuses on key long-term suppliers with whom cooperation is appropriate. The logic is that through developing the supplier's capability, both parties will share in benefits of better performance, better quality, shorter cycle times, and lower. Encourage collaboration between individual suppliers, drive innovation, create stronger long-term supplier relationships, resolve performance and quality issues, enhanced customer satisfaction. Worldwide sourcing. This is also termed as global sourcing. It is the process of sourcing goods and services from the international market across geopolitical boundaries. It aims to exploit global efficiencies such as lower cost skilled labor, cheaper raw materials, and other economic factors like tax breaks and low trade tariffs. Examples are call centers in India, clothing and shoe manufacture in Ethiopia and Thailand. Some advantages of global sourcing are learning how to do business successfully in a new market, finding and developing alternate supplier sources to reduce cost and stimulate competition. The opportunity exists to locate scarce skills and resources not available or unproductive at home, thereby increasing manufacturing capacity and other technical capabilities. There are some disadvantages. Monitoring costs go up, and there are hidden costs relating to the effort and the time spent learning about different cultures and time zones, especially in the beginning. There is exposure to financial, political, legal risks, often in emerging economics. In the service industries, there is also a real risk in losing a grip on your intellectual property. So this is all about outsourcing and its strategies. Thank you.